كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to lesson 4 of the second semester. We're on Kitab al-Qisma, and hopefully we have been able to understand the philosophy behind this, inshallah. So what we're going to look at now is this distributor, the divider. What procedure does he have to follow, what he can include, how does he do it. It's very interesting that there's going to be, after he divides everything, he has to be able to understand it, and then he draws lots, and then he gives, the system that they use is quite interesting. And then they discuss that what has to be divided. There's certain things that are much easier to divide, while other things are more complicated. So what is included? How does he divide a house, for example? How does he divide money? How does he cash? And then there's also a discussion that if it's residences and houses that have 2 floors, then is it the top floor or the bottom floor? Is it the top floor or the bottom floor? What's going on, So there's a lot of that discussion that's taking place, meaning is the top floor the same as the bottom floor, and so on. So that's what we're going to be, inshallah, discussing. What about if there's a water source is only one side of the land and not the other side? Then how do you distribute between them? So all of this stuff is what we'll be covering inshallah in today's lecture. So let us start off that he says Kayfiyatul Qisma. This is what Imam Maydani says, Kayfiyatul Qisma, and this is on page 213 for those who want to follow along in the Lubab. لما فرغ من بيان القسم بيان ما يقسم وما لا يقسم شرع في بيان كيفية القسمة. So when he finishes off the discussion of what division is all about and what can be divided and what can't be divided, he now starts an exposition regarding how to divide. How do they go about dividing? So then he says, وَيَنْبَغِي لِلْقَاسِمِ أَنْ يُصَوِّرَ مَا يَقْسِمُهُ عَلَى قِرْطَاسٍ. First, he should document or sketch. He should actually sketch out what he's dividing. So sketch out, find the feet, find how big it is, measure it up, like the way surveyors do nowadays or architects do nowadays. So if it's to do with buildings, then he probably needs some architecture knowledge to be able to measure things using the right tools and so on. So figure all of that out first. So he says that the distributor, the divider, he should document or sketch out and make some drawings of what he is going to divide on a piece of paper, or nowadays you could do it on computer, on CAD or something. لِيُمْكِنَهُ حِفْظَهُ, so that he can preserve it to show what he's done later. It's going to be a document that this is exactly what's going to happen. He'll give a copy to them as well, so that they can prove what he's done. وَرَفْعَهُ لِلْقَاضِي, and then he can present that to the judge, right? وَيُعَدِّلَهُ, that means he will do ta'dil. He will make it fair. He'll make it just. يعني يسويه على سهام القسمة. He will fairly distribute it according to the shares, according to the partners, right? ويروى ويعزله أن يقطعه بالقسمة عن غيره, and he will essentially separate out the portions and make sure that they're very distinct from one another, so that there's no arguments later. It's very clear what he's done. وَيَذْرَعُهُ لِيُعْرَفَ or لِيَعْرِفَ قَدْرَهُ. He will measure it. So dhira, how many cubits or whatever the meters or whatever it is nowadays. Nowadays, you can even get these electronic measure tapes that there's a laser, it's laser aided, and they can tell you exactly how much it is, how large something is. وَيُقَوِّمَ الْبِنَاءَ. Here يقوم means evaluate, taqweem. He will, if it's a building, then he will evaluate its value, right, its price. لأنه ربما يحتاجه آخرا, because you might need that at the end if it's not working out, where you can completely delineate 4 portions or 3 portions or whatever it is. So he may have to check what each portion is valued at, and then be able to divide it according to the price. ويفرز كل نصيب عن الباقي بطريقه وشربه. He will separate out, distinguish every portion, every share from the remaining shares with its own path and with its own plumbing, for example. You can say completely independently, make them all independent. So he'll probably have to take into consideration that if he's sharing out a piece of land or a large building, then how are they going to get water to all of these places and the necessities? He has to take those things into consideration. حتى لا يكون لنصيب بعضهم بنصيب الآخر أو آخر تعلق, so that going forward they don't have to encroach on one another's areas or property, because the reason why they want a division is that they just want to cut out all possibilities of the chaos that might ensue from this. So that's why he wants to separate it in a way that they can independently now look after their own sections, and they don't have to have any relationship with others. I mean, that's not always going to be possible. Maybe on a piece of land it might be okay, but it's going to be difficult in other cases. ليتحقق معنى التمييز والإفراز تمام التحقق, so that the proper element of distinction, separation can be fully realized and established. Otherwise, what's the point? After that, they're still arguing, right? ثم يلقب الأنصباء نصيبا بالأول والذي يليه بالثاني والثالث بالثالث والرابع وما بعده على هذا المنوال. Now, he is just on shares. He's not in mind that, okay, I'm going to give this share to that partner or that shareholder or that inheritor. His job is not to do that. His job is to do it as fairly as possible. So what he's going to do is he's just going to split them up equally, right, to the best of the ability, and then write 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, however many there are. So that's why he's saying that he will title the different shares, the first one as 1, then number 2, then 3, and so on. ويكتب أسماء المتقاسمين على قطع قرطاس. Then he's going to write down the names of the people that he's dividing it for, the shareholders, the partners, the inheritors. He's going to write their names down on separate pieces of paper or on cloth or whatever it is. وَتُوضَعُ فِي كِيسٍ أَوْ نَحْوٍ, and then he's going to place all of those, roll them up, put them into a bowl or a package or a bag or something. وَيَجْعَلُهَا قُرْعَةً, and then he's going to pick lots. He's going to make it a picking lots. That's how he's going to determine. ثُمَّ يُخْرِجْ الْقُرْعَةِ, then he's going to pull out the lots, draw the lots as they say. أو قطعة من تلك القطع المكتوب فيها أسماء المتقاسمين. He's going to pull out essentially one of those named papers. فمن خرج اسمه أولا فله السهم الأول. Whoever's name comes out, whoever's name is drawn first, the first portion is for him. ومن خرج اسمه ثانيا فله السهم الثاني, and likewise number 2, whoever's name comes out, he gets the second portion. Number 3, وهلم جرا وهذا حيث اتحدت السهام. You can only do this when all of the portions are similar. So let's just say that you've got a long piece of land and it belongs to 4 of them. Just chop it up so they can all build a house. The first house, the second house, the third house, or the fourth house, or the first 2, 3, 4, right? And then whoever's name comes out in the drawing the lots, then he'll get this house on this side, the extreme right house, the left house, and so on and so forth. فَلَوْ اِخْتَلَفَتِ السِّهَامِ. However, if the portions are different to one another, بأن كانت بين ثلاثة مثلا لأحدهم 10 أسهم ولآخر 5 أسهم ولآخر سهم, right? Sometimes it could be that it's not equally shared between them. It could be that there are 3 people, 3 partners. One of them is entitled to 10 shares, another one is entitled to 5 shares, and the third one is entitled to 1 share. So that means he's going to have to make 16 shares, right? Now you can't give the person with 10 shares 2 here, 2 there, and 2 there. That's just silly in one piece of land. So that's why he's explaining جعلها 16 سهما. He makes that into 16 shares. وكتب أسماء الثلاثة, then he writes down the names of the three on separate pieces of paper. فإن خرج أولا اسم صاحب العشرة. So now, if the name of the person holding the 10 comes out first and is drawn first, أعطاه الأول وتسعة متصلة به. He will then appoint for him the first of those 16 shares. The way he's done it, he's split it up into 16 equal shares. He'll give him the first one and then the 9 that are next to it. He gets to pick the first, right? Because his name came out first. لِتَكُونَ سِهَامُهُ عَلى الْإِتِّصَالِ, so that all of his shares, all of his portions are all in one place. They're all linked to one another. وَهَكَذَا حَتَّى يُتِمْ, and then pull out the next name. If that's the person with one share, then he gets the next portion. And if it's the person with the 5 shares, then he gets the 5 portions, and then the last one is left for the last person. قال في الهداية وقوله في الكتاب ويفرز كل نصيب بطريقه وشربه بان الأفضل فإن لم يفعل أو لم يمكن جاز على ما نذكره بتفصيله إن شاء الله تعالى. Hidayah clarifies one thing, right? Saying that where it mentioned earlier in Quduri, as I mentioned, that he should separate everybody's portion with its own pathway, with its own irrigation or water system or plumbing or whatever it is. He says that is just to provide an exposition of the most superior way of doing it, the preferred way of doing it. Sometimes you can't do it like that. فَإِن لَمْ يَفْعَلْ, if he doesn't do it like that, or it's not even possible to do that because you can't, there's not, the plumbing isn't there or whatever it is, or it's just not possible, it's permissible as well. And this is something, he said, we're going to mention later in more detail, inshallah, he says. Now, he's saying that, we discuss picking the lots to determine whose is what. Again, that's not necessary. وَالْقُرْأَةُ لِتَطْيِيبِ الْقُلُوبِ. The purpose of that is to make them feel good, that it's not being done in unfairness. People have maybe more reliance on picking lots because it's just like it's happening from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they're believers, then they'll believe it's happening from Allah. And if they're not believers, or their faith is not that strong, then maybe they're going to feel it's just luck or fortune or whatever that means. The Prophet ﷺ used to pick lots to decide which of his wives to take with him on a journey, on a travel. When he was at home, then he had to give them fair treatment of spending one night with each. However, when he traveled, he could take whoever it was. There was it wasn't necessary for him to take one and then the other and then the other. But he would pick lots. And usually Aisha radiallahu anha's name would come out, they say, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that he loved her most. So that's how he would do it there. He says it very clearly here that وَالْقُرْعَةُ لِتَطْيِيبِ الْقُلُوبِ. This picking, drawing lots is only to تُهْمَةِ الْمَيْلِ, and also to remove any suspicion that he is inclined to one or another, or he's being biased. حتى لو عين لكل منها نصيبا من غير إقراء جاز. Since he's been officially, appointed to this post and they've trusted him to do it, or the judge has told him to do it, he can actually go and just split it himself without picking lots. He has to be done fairly, but he can say, okay, these 5 are yours and these 10 are yours, if that's what's due to them. لأنه في معنى القضاء, because ultimately he is in a position of the judiciary. فيملك الإلزام, he does have the right of imposition. He can implement this how he wants, but where you can work better with the people, make them feel better and allow them to accept your decision, is better to do that, right? Why make it complicated? Okay, now the next section he says is عدم إدخال الدراهم والدنانير في القسمة. If a person has left a lot and they need somebody to help distribute it, so you've got maybe assets like land and cars and vehicles or animals, and then you've also got some cash. He's saying that you don't need to include the cash within that. The cash can be split up very easily separately, so don't include that in it. ولا يدخل القسام في القسمة الدراهم والدنانير. This dividing agent should not include the cash, the dinar and dirhams in there. لأن القسمة تجري في المشترك والمشترك بينهما العقار للدراهم والدنانير. So the way he explains it here is that what is actually jointly owned by them is the piece of land or the building, not the dinar and dirhams. What does he mean by that? He'll explain. فلو كان بينهما دار وأرادوا قسمتها وفي أحد الجانبين فضل بناء فأراد أحدهم أن يكون عوض البناء دراهم وأراد الآخر أن يكون عوضه من الأرض فإنه يجعل عوضه من الأرض ولا يكلف الذي وقع البناء في نصيبه أن يرد بإزائه الدراهم. So another way of looking at this dirham and dinar story and this text of Quduri is that as far as possible, because that's the example he's then giving, when it's a piece of land, when it's building, when it's real estate, try not to include any money in that. Try to get it done by giving somebody more of this and somebody less of that based on its value. So he's going to explain. He said, for example, if there's a house that they have already inherited or they have acquired somehow and they want it divided between them, and let's just say there's two of them, there's two partners. On one side, if you look at this part of the estate, there's more buildings on this side and there's more land on the other side, right? So one of them wants to give the more buildings to this side and wants cash for it instead, that he wants a cash compensation for taking more building. The other one is saying that I'd rather give you a bit more of my land, right? I'll take the extra building, but I'll give you a bit more of my land, of the land section. So priority would be, and the preference would be, that it should be done with whatever's the property there, not to add any cash to it, meaning outside cash. This doesn't have to be cash that was part of the inheritance, right? So rather than tell him to buy that additional extra, give him more land. So this one guy gets less land but more building, and the other guy gets less building but more land. So he can, proportionately build on that if he wants to and get the same thing. وَلَا يُكَلِّفَ الَّذِي وَقَعَ الْبِنَاءَ فِي نَصِيبِهِ يَرُدُّ بِإِزَائِهِ الدَّرَاهِمِ. And the dividing agent should not obligate, should not make responsible for the one who had excess buildings in his section to provide dirhams and payment for those excess buildings, give from the land. So try to get it sorted out with the property itself. إِلَّا بِتَرَاضِيهِمْ. Of course, if they both decided to keep exactly equal, but because the one side equal land, but one side has more buildings, so the other guy pay him and he's willing to pay him because he wants more land as well. He wants to maintain his portion of the land. That's completely fine. So there's a saying in Urdu, for those of you who understand Urdu, right, is that Miyan biwi razi to kya kare qadi. Miyan biwi razi to kya kare qadi. Meaning, if the husband and wife are satisfied, mutually accepting whatever it is, then the qadi can't do it. What's the qadi going to do? What's the judge going to do? So here, if the two partners are happy with doing it another way, then it's fine. Then it's a settlement. That's completely fine. لما في القسمة من معنى المبادلة, because obviously then it's going to be one of the compensatory schemes, and that's completely fine. You can have that as well. فيجوز دخول الدراهم فيها بالتراضي. So you are allowed to bring in dinar and dirhams, right? So here the discussion actually wasn't about dinars and dirhams left in the property. This is about additional dinars and dirhams, additional cash, settlements in lieu of excess, property that you could receive. So if they both agree with that, it's completely fine. You just can't have that obligated by the judge. إِلَّا إِذَا تَعَذَّرْ. Yes, there are certain extreme cases where it's just not possible to divide it with what's there and make exchanges through that and come to some terms. Then in that case, the Qadi can then, if he sees that there's no other way to deal with this, then the Qadi does have a right to impose one side if they want this particular portion. Okay, this side, whoever takes portion A will have to pay some cash. Portion B, you might get less of this but more of this, and he has to take the cash because he's going to get less of this. There's no other way to do it. Just sometimes the dynamics are such. So he can do that in some cases, right, if it's necessary. That's why it mentions in the Yanabir that Imam Quduri's statement, وَلَا يُدْخِلُ فِي الْقِسْمَةِ الدَّرَاهِمَ الدَّنَانِيرِ. He clarifies that where Imam Quduri mentions that don't bring in any dinar and dirhams in the equation, right? What he means by that is obviously when it's possible to do it without it, just by giving extra bit of land or something. أما إذا لم تمكن, when it's absolutely not possible, عدل أضعف الأنصباء بالدراهم والدنانير, then he would evaluate the the lesser portion, the weaker portion, right, with dinar and dirhams, and then the other guy can pay him that and take the larger portion because there's no other way to do it. For example, let's just say that there are two houses, one is larger than the other, one is worth 120,000, the other one is worth 100,000. But if they were to split both of the houses in half, it won't be a good idea. So what they should do is, one guy's getting a house of 100,000, the other guy's getting 120,000. That means that the 120,000 guy was getting a slightly larger house or slightly more valued house. He should pay 10,000 to the other side. So that means they're both left with 110,000 of value each, right? So this guy's going to have 120,000, but he's paid for the 10,000. So that's why he's only getting 110,000 value, and he's paying 10,000 to the other side, who's getting 100,000 value plus 10,000 in cash. Because sometimes you just can't divide or exchange and settle with what's there, so you're going to have to add cash to it. That's why in Tasheeh it says that in some editions of Quduri, it actually mentions that it is more appropriate for the judge that he doesn't add any dinar and dirhams. However, if he does so, it is fine, but it's better not to. So that's just a similar reiteration of what he said earlier, that it's better not to. But if he has to do it, then he does have the discretion to do it. Okay. Now, the next little section here is, if the pathway, if they split the land, but the pathway from the road goes, there's no other way to do it, it has to go through one person's land. Or the irrigation canal has to go through one person's canal, and the other guy is going to need it. And there's no way to split the land in a way that they can both take benefit from it without going into each other's land, and that's stay on common land. So that's the discussion here. فَإِنْ قَسَمَ بَيْنَهُمْ وَلِأَحَدِهِمْ مَسِيلُ مَاءٍ فِي مِلْكِ الْآخَرِ أَوْ طَرِيقٌ أَوْ نَحْوُهُ. So if he splits and divides the land between them, and one of them, their water source comes through the other person's ownership, their land, or their path has to go through the other person's land, or anything like that. وَالْحَالَ أَنَّهُ لَمْ يُشْتَرَطْ ذَلِكَ فِي الْقِسْمَةِ. And that wasn't a discussion, that was not stipulated that, oh, I better have right or this. It just so happened that he divided, they both agreed, and then they discovered that, oh, for person A to get into his land, he's going to have to go through person B's land, or the water comes through his land. So now, what do you do now? It's already been split. So he's saying that فَإِنْ أَمْكَنَ صَرْفُ ذَلِكَ الطَّرِيقِ وَالْمَسِيلَ عَنْهُ فَلَيْسَ لَهُ يَسْتَطْرِقْ وَيُسِيلَ فِي نَصِيبِ الشَّرِيكِ الْآخَرِ. If there is a way to divert the path, to make it direct into that, or the waterway to come directly, then he doesn't have a right to try to force a path through the other person's land, or force an irrigation canal through the other person's land, because he's able to realize the full benefit of his land by just separating out and finding another path. If that's not possible, then this is a bad division. Start again. Annul this division and let them start again in a way that they can both benefit from this, in a way that it's not going to cause, because what's going to happen is, usually in these cases, the other person might cause problems and keep causing problems and so on, and you just want to cut that and just make it completely independent. Yeah, so later they essentially, once it's been done, then they later realize that this isn't going to work, it's going to cause a constant problem, so they have to annul it, and لأنها مختلة, because it's been mixed up, لبقاء الاختلاط, because they still their properties are still mixed in a sense, right? فتستأنف, so it has to be restarted again. Right, so this time just do it properly. Now the next section is regarding buildings that have different floors. So who gets which floor, different values, subhanallah. Sometimes in high rises there's a benefit in the lowest floor, but there's also a benefit in the highest floor, because the highest floor you have less noise, you have better views, less disturbance sometimes. However, if there's an emergency or something, then it's more complicated to get down, whereas the first person may have access to a garden, but then less security, because people might be able to break in there, whereas it's difficult to break in on the higher floors, at least from externally. So there's different reasons. Anyway, he says, تقسيم العلوي والسفلي. This is how do you divide when it has different floors. So وإذا كان الذي يراد قسمته بعضه سفل ولا علو له أي ليس فوقه علو أو علو أو فوقه علو للغير. So the asset for distribution, one part of it is on the lower floor and it actually doesn't have a second floor, or that the second floor belongs to somebody else. So that's not even part of division, it's just the bottom floor. وَبَعْضُهُ عُلْوًا لَا سُفْلَ لَهُ. And then others, there's another building, so they've inherited maybe, or they've bought a package of multiple units, and one of them is on the ground floor, another one is on the first floor, right? So first floor in England terms, because in America I think the ground floor is considered the first floor and then the second floor, so they just have 12 floors, so it'll just say 12 floors, but I think sometimes they miss out number 13 or something, right? There's some superstition like that if I remember correctly. Whereas in England, right, the ground floor is called ground floor and then it starts 1, 2, 3. So if it's a 13 floor building, I'm not sure how to say this, but if it's 13 floors, then it would mean ground floor plus 12 floors, right? So it kind of gets a bit confusing. You have to just understand. But anyway, so he's saying, and then they've got another building which is a higher floor, and they don't have the bottom floor, it's not theirs. And then وَبَعْضُهُ سِفْلٌ لَهُ عُلْوٌ, and then you've got another building where it has both the bottom floor and a higher floor. So how are you going to divide that now? Because each of them have a separate value, separate purpose. قُوِّمَ كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ عَلَى حِدَتِهِ. So evaluate each one of them, get a valuation done for each one of them separately, and then divided by qima, divided by the price, by the value. So okay, that ground floor there, that high floor there is valued this much and this much, and that one, the one with the full building, is valued at that much. So this will be equivalent to these two, or something like that, or add some cash in if you have to, right? Because you're not going to split those up, because sometimes it may not be splittable. This is according to Imam Muhammad. That's the way he says. He said do it by evaluation, by the cash, by its monetary value. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Yusuf, they're together. In this case, Shaykhain, they say yuksam bidhar. They go split it according to measure. So if one is larger and the other two are smaller and they equivalent to the larger one, then you could do it that way. ثم اختلف في كيفية القسمة بالذرع. However, they differ with regards to how to measure. Imam Abu Hanifa says, so this is interesting, is it a meter for a meter regardless of whether it's a higher floor or lower floor, or do lower floors have higher value than higher floors? So that's what you're going to know. Imam Abu Hanifa, and again, this is based on urf, this is based on the customs of the time, so this is probably what was going on in their time, that's why they said it that way. And today we could legislate different based on the urf and the custom of our time. So Imam Abu Hanifa says ذراع من السفل بذراعين من العلوي or علوي, that he reckons that one square cubit of the lower floor, meaning the ground floor, would be equivalent in value to 2 square cubits of the higher floor. In those days they measured in cubits. Cubits is essentially from fingertip to elbow. So that was a cubit, usually about 48 to 50 centimeters, half a meter. That's what usually is the understanding of that, right? So yeah, so essentially saying that today we'd say 1 square foot or 1 square meter of the bottom floor would be equivalent to 2 square meters of the higher floor. Again, that would just depend. وقال ابن يوسف ذراع بذراعين. He says no, it's equal, 1 meter for meter. ثم قيل أجاب كل منها على عادة أهل عصره أو بلده. So then it's been reported that actually this was all based on the custom of their respective times. And the times from Imam Abu Hanifa to Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahumullah, their times had changed. So initially it was more valued to have it on the ground floor, whereas later it was equivalent. So Imam Abu Yusuf said no, leave it the same. وقيل اختلاف معنى, that no, there's it's not based on the custom of their time, but that's what they actually believe regardless of the situation. Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion has been said to be more sound. However, that's only when you compare Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf's difference. Then Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion is stronger in that case. However, the mashayikh, the jurists have chosen and preferred Imam Muhammad's view, which is just go by value, just go by the monetary value. In fact, in the Tuhfatul Fuqaha and Bada'i, it mentions that the practice is on Imam Muhammad's view now, for them, at least in their time. And Yanabi, Hidayah, Sharh al-Zahidi, and the Muhit, they say that the fatwa is on that today. And this is as mentioned in the Tasheeh. Right. They try to, mashallah, provide rulings for every occasion. So now what happens is, if you have a few evaluators and they differ with regards to their evaluation. So there is, there's a host of them, 1, 2, 3 of them, and that's what nowadays what they do is, when you want to evaluate a building, they'll usually get 3 valuations done by 3 different estate agents. And then they'll take the kind of average between them. So one says, oh, this is valued at 97, I can get for it. Another says, I can get 100. I said, no, I can probably get you 150, 105. So 100 seems to be, 101 seems to be kind of the average there, right? So اختلاف المتقاسمين أو متقاسمين وحكم شهادة القاسم. إذا اختلف المتقاسمون في القسمة فشهد القاسمان قبلت شهادتهما. So let's say there's multiple evaluators and at least 2 of them provide some witness. Then, since, as you know from Kitab al-Shahadat, that once 2 male witnesses are there, so in here it's the same quantum. 2 evaluators will be sufficient to go by an opinion. قال في الهداية الذي ذكره قول أبي حنيفة وأبي يوسف. This is Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf's view. Imam Muhammad says no, that won't be accepted. That used to be Imam Abu Yusuf's earlier opinion. That's what Imam Shafi'i says as well. That no, you just can't go with that. If there's a difference of opinion, you can't just go with the first 2. So let's just say that there was a house that was divided between the inheritors, or there was a house that was divided by their purchasers. And one of them is saying that, you know what, I didn't get my full share. I did not receive my full share. And he brings in 2 evaluators to witness to that. Then, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Yusuf, that would be accepted. That, yeah, I haven't got it, so let's do it again. So he can force it back onto the table. Imam Muhammad says, no, it's done. You can't do it. However, there's some discussion about whose opinion is what. There's some difference of opinion about whose opinion is what. Imam Khassaf has mentioned that Imam Muhammad's view was just like Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf's view. Right? So it looks like there's some difference of opinion. Maybe the other view is a Shafi'i view. And it doesn't matter whose divider, a distribution agent it is, whether it's the one appointed by the judge or whether it's a private one that they have hired. Makes no difference. Jamal al-Islam comes to the rescue. He says Sahih opinion, sound opinion is Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. And that is what Burhani, Nasafi and others have relied upon. So, yeah, there's a few issues left. We'll just deal with that to conclude today's lesson. Yeah, so to finish off today's lesson, I'm just going to mention one more little mas'ala. And then after that, we'll inshallah conclude today's lesson. فإن ادعى أحدهما أي المتقاسمان الغلط في القسمة وزعم أنه مما أصابه شيئا في يد صاحبه. So what's going on here is that there was a division that was done, an official division that was undertaken, and then one of the 2 shareholders, one of the 2 partners, who had received this share, he suddenly claims that there was a mistake that was made in the division. And he claims that a portion that he should have received, that he was entitled to, has actually ended up in the possession of the other, of his partner, of the other person. So he was supposed to get this particular piece of land as well, or this particular sliver, or this particular car, or whatever, and it actually turns out to be in the other person's lot. Now, okay, makes sense, right? That a mistake like that could be made. Issue here is, then Imam Quduri mentions that وَقَدْ كَانَ أَشْهَدَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بِالْإِسْتِيفَاءِ. He had already testified before, after the division was made, he testified that I've received my share. Whether he did that just, in good faith or whatever the reason was, he'd already said, he'd already testified again, upon himself that I fully received my share. So then he's saying, لم يصدق على ذلك الذي يدعيه إلا ببينة. Now, the judgment is made. So he can't be now, his claim can't be accepted. Whatever he's claiming now, this lawsuit is pointing, can't be accepted unless he has evidence to show it. So if he has evidence, okay. Reason is that, the reason why it can't just be accepted like that is because he's now claiming to annul the division after it had already taken place. So you need good evidence to be able to secure that kind of annulment. If he doesn't have any evidence, then they, according to one opinion, the other partners will be made to swear an oath that wallahi, we don't have anything more than what we were entitled to and nothing more has come into our portion. However, if one of them, if they're willing to swear the oath, then it's thrown out. However, this is obviously in the case where there's no evidence. If he provides evidence, then it's a done deal, then they can change it, they can redo it. But if he doesn't have evidence, then they will be made to swear an oath. And if any one of them refuses to swear an oath, then you know what happens then. And that person is declared as liable, right? So then what you do is, let's just say there were 4 partners, and he's claiming that some of mine has gone to the others. So he doesn't have, if he has evidence, then obviously they'll have to do it again and he should get his full share. If he doesn't have evidence, then they're made to swear an oath, 3 people. One of them refused to swear an oath, the other 2 just did it, right? So his share, the claimant share, and the person who refused to swear an oath, their sections, their portions will be put together again. And then whatever their entitlement was, it will be redistributed between them to make sure that they get the right portions. Because as you know from our earlier Kitabu Adab al-Qadi, Kitabu al-Shahadat, that anybody who refused to swear an oath, then it's like he is relinquishing his right, whether he's guilty or not. By refusing to swear an oath, he's willing to give up his right essentially to have it reassessed in this case. So that becomes evidence against him only. He can't force it on others. They've sworn an oath. They're out of the picture now. However, because it's this guy refused to swear an oath, either correctly, validly, he has more than his share, so that's why he's refusing to swear the oath. So only his section can be encroached upon and brought back into the division and then redivided, right? So yeah, there's a lot more discussion on this masala. In fact, Imam Shami says that he's also written, Imam Shami means Imam Maidani's teacher. He's actually written a whole treatise on this subject, and there's a lot more discussion about exactly what's going on here and other possibilities. That's why Maidani does bring afterwards, he says that really his da'wah, his claim, his lawsuit should not be listened to at all, because it's already done, and it's like there's a contradiction now, because he already testified that I've received my share. Now he says I didn't receive my share. So you can't keep messing around with the system. So that will be declared later in the discussion. There's lots of other discussion about this, but I think this is enough for now for us to understand this, inshallah. Jazakallah khairun. Inshallah, we'll see you in the next lesson. We hereby complete lesson 4, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.